Find the derivative of y equals sine x cosine x plus 4 sine x. Then evaluate y prime of pi over 3. Y here is made up of two terms. The first is a product of sine x times cosine x, and the second is 4 sine x. When we take the derivative y prime, which can also be called dy dx, the derivative of the first term will be a product rule. We have a first expression sine x, a second expression cosine x. The product rule is the derivative of the first, derivative of sine x, which is cosine x, times the second left alone, cosine x, plus the first left alone, sine x, times the derivative of the second derivative of cosine is negative sine x. That's all the derivative of just the first term using the product rule. Now we have the second term, 4 sine x, the derivative of that, the 4 will come along, and the derivative of sine is cosine. So y prime, or dy dx, equals to cosine x times cosine x is cosine squared x. Sine x times a negative sine x will be a negative sine squared x, and then plus 4 cosine x. There's our derivative y prime. The next step is to evaluate y prime of pi over 3. Y prime of pi over 3 means to plug a pi over 3 into each of the x's. Cos squared of pi over 3 minus sine squared of pi over 3 plus 4 cosine of pi over 3. Cos squared means to take the cosine first and square the result. It may be helpful to write it that way to remind you. The same thing with sine squared. That means to evaluate the sine first and then square that result. And then the third term I'll just leave the way it is. Now, we can evaluate the cosine of pi over 3. Cosine of pi over 3 is a 1/2. So 1/2 squared minus the sine of pi over 3, which is root 3 over 2. Square that result. Plus 4 times, and then the cosine of pi over 3 again is a 1/2. 1/2 squared is 1/4. 1/2 times 1/2. Square root of 3 over 2 squared will be 3 over 4. The numerator is root 3 times root 3, which is root 9, or just 3. Denominator will be 2 times 2. 2 squared, 4. And then our third term here, 4 times 1/2, will be 4/2. If we combine the first two terms, since they're already over a 4, we will have 1 minus 3, or negative 2 over 4. And the second term is a 4 over 2. Now the negative 2 over 4 can be reduced by 2, negative 1 over 2. The second term I'm not going to reduce because I need to add these together, and if I don't reduce it, they're already over a common denominator. I have a negative 1/2 plus a 4/2. Negative 1 plus 4 is 3/2. 3 over 2.